So let's begin the second layer by painting in the forehead. We're starting off with color number 2, and we're just adding a small amount of color number 2. It's mostly going to get covered up. And I'll wipe off the brush, and I'm getting some more color number 3, and we begin to apply color number 3. As you can see, we're applying the paint with small little brush strokes, and we're just going over color number 2 with color number 3. And we're painting in a small area. You can't really try to paint in too much because the paint will just dry. And now we're going in with color number 4. It's a really light color. We're trying to create transition from one color to the next. We're trying to create pretty seamless transition. That's why we're using such small feathery brush strokes. So I didn't really add enough color number 3, so I go back in and add some more. So I'm going to go back in right now with color number 4, and I just go right into color number 3. And we're just overlapping the colors. I wipe the brush off, and I begin to diffuse the edge. So I'm diffusing the edge with a clean brush. So we go back in with some more color number 4, and we're going to diffuse the edge a little more with this color. And we're actually moving into the other color. We're diffusing the edge, and we're blending some of the color in a little bit more. We're actually moving that darker color, or making that darker color a bit lighter, or making the lighter color a bit darker, however you want to see it. Now with the dry brush, I go back in and begin to diffuse the edge some more. Now you can't go too much into the dark color with that third color that we're now creating, or you can't go too much into the light color, because you've actually mixed another color on the canvas. I'm now going to go in and paint the eyebrow. And I'm painting it a little bit differently. I was using very small brush strokes going across. Now I'm actually following the shape of the eyebrow. It's a slightly different way to blend. The line doesn't diffuse as much, but you can blend that way. It makes a very smooth edge. As you can see, the eyebrows are much smoother looking than the forehead. And that's really by design. All right, I'm going in with color number 4. And I'm blending it a little bit more. I go back in with some color number 3. The color number 4 was a little bit too low, but it's okay. Gonna paint in that little light area right between the eyelid and the eyebrow. I first go in with well, I was supposed to go in with color number 2, so I add some more color number 2 and just correct my little mistake. Had the wrong color on the brush. Yeah, add color number 2 around that area. Then I go back in. I'm gonna go back in a minute with color number 3. So I'll make sure there's enough. I'll make sure there's enough wet paint in the area that I'm painting. And now I go in with color number 3. And I diffuse the edges. I extend that color outward, creating that third color. That'll be a step between color number 3 and color number 2. And I don't try to overwork it, I just let it dry that way. Now I'm going to extend that lighter color, that color number 4, into color number 3. By doing this, you can see the color that it's overlapping. The color that it's overlapping is going to create a small step between the two colors. So blending the colors together is going to create a step, but overlapping the colors that way is going to create another step, as you can see. It makes for very, very, very awesome blending. Creating these small steps you couldn't otherwise do. So I refresh color number 4. Now I go in with color number 3 and I blend it in some more. So at this point I go back in with a dry brush and I really diffuse the edges. Now I go in with color number 2 and I make sure I get the area filled with paint, with enough wet paint so it won't dry. And I go in with color number 3. So now we're going to go in and paint the bridge of the nose. I painted one side first, and now I'm going to paint in the other side. The way I like to proceed is I'll add, most of the time, I'll add dark color, and then I'll blend over it with lighter color. I usually add darker color first, most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. And I pay a lot of special attention to brush strokes. Brush strokes are really important. I learned a lot about brush strokes looking at other painters' paintings. Not actually watching them paint, but looking at their paintings. I always wondered how they were able to make a painting so smooth with a brush. So I'd look at their paintings in earlier stages and see what direction they were actually painting in. And what they did was they just keep adding layers of paint, painting in a similar direction until all the brush strokes disappeared. And that's pretty much what we're going to do. We're going to be painting small brush strokes in the same direction in layers until the brush strokes completely disappear. And another thing I would often look for was the weave pattern of the canvas that they were using. So I could see what kind of canvas they were using. With this canvas, it doesn't really have a weave pattern. Normally what I see is kind of a checkerboard, a square weave pattern. The canvas I'm using this time is a little bit different. It's a very thin canvas. It's not that thick. All right, so I go in with color number 3. And I get the nose painted. And I'm using a generous amount of paint. I'm being very careful. I'm painting with the point at this point. I'm painting with the point. We're using a number 2 round brush. And I go in with color number 4. And I overlap the line just slightly. Not too much. And as you're noticing, the lines are just getting more and more diffused. It's a good deal more diffused than it was in the first layer. As a matter of fact, it becomes easier to blend the more you paint. So the more layers you add, the easier it becomes. The first layer should be the hardest. So we now begin to blend under the nose. And last time we extended that light color all the way across. We're going to do the same this time. And again, you notice where it crosses over into the dark color, there's still a bit of a line. Well, that's fine. It creates a small step. That small step will be hardly noticeable by the time we're finished, but it's still going to be there. And it's going to create an extra step, and it's going to make the thing look amazing. So I'm talking a lot about blending, and I'll continue to talk a lot about blending because it makes such a huge difference in the outcome of a painting at this point. It's a very specific technical skill that makes a huge difference in the outcome of your work. So now I begin to extend some of color number 2 across color number 3, or let's change that. I begin to extend color number 3 across color number 4 to create a bottom lip. And now I go in with color number 4 and I begin to diffuse those edges, and I completely go over color number 3. Well, what I want to do is create a different color that kind of distinguishes itself from the bottom lip. I wanted the lip line to be a different color than the rest of the bottom lip. I wanted it to be slightly lighter. So again, I add a generous amount of paint to the side of the arm and the back. I then go in with color number 4. Small feathery brush strokes again, just overlapping the line where they meet. I wipe the brush off and I begin to diffuse the edges. And this should be easier to do than it was in the first layer. I begin to add more of that color number 4. With a dry brush or a clean brush, I go in and diffuse the edges some more, leaving very little color number 2 or color number 3. So I go back in with color number 3 and I begin to diffuse the edges. And I'm using the number 2 brush for a very specific reason. You can get into very small areas with it. Like that very small line that I'm painting in the shoulder right now. And I treated the arm and the shoulder as 2 different spaces. It's because I don't want the color to dry out on me. So I go in with a little color number 2, painting that very dark area under the chin, that shadow. I now go in with color number 3. It's sort of a transition color from the shadow to the mid-tone. I come in with a dry brush and I begin to blend the 2 colors in together. Now I begin to add some more color number 3. I diffuse the edges just a bit more. It's time to add color number 4. And we just go over the edges where the colors meet. And I diffuse the edges a little bit. I go back in with color number 3 and overlap where the colors meet. And I begin to extend that color outward to create a jawline. I go back over with color number 4 and I begin to diffuse the edges a bit. Now on one side of the jawline, I want the edges to be really diffused. On the other side, I try to go for a hard line. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm trying to create a hard line for the jawline on one side. The other side I want diffused. And I completely cover over color number 4 with color number 3 for the jawline. I'm trying to create another color. I diffuse the edges where the third color is created. I now go in to paint in that light spot right above the lip. So of course, add some of the darker color first, color number 4. And now add color number 5. All right. I diffuse the paint with a dry brush or a clean brush. And at this point, I've switched brushes. I'm using the number 6 round brush. And I could use it for this because it's able to make a point. And right now we're just painting with the point. But sometimes I like to use the larger brushes because it holds more paint. All right, I go in, I begin to add some color number 4. We now add color number 5 to diffuse the edges. And it's going to be pretty easy to blend color number 4 and 5 together because they're really similar in value. They're both really light colors. The hardest colors to blend would be color number 3 and color number 4 because they're very different in value. And because they're different in value, it creates a great step. There's a large step. There isn't that big of a step between 4 and 5. And lighter colors, because they're thicker, they're easier to blend. Thick paint is easier to blend than really thin paint. All right, adding little brush strokes. Color number 4 with the number 6 round brush. I go back in with the lightest color, color number 5, and I blend them together. And now beginning to fill in that space. Fill in that space. And now go in to paint the forehead. We start off with the dark color or the darker color. That's color number 4. And I do one side of the forehead, not both sides. I then add color number 5. And now go in to paint in the other side. And I'll just pick out a small shape. I know the paint won't dry before I'm finished painting it. Like if I tried to do the entire forehead, one part of it would dry before I could get to it with wet paint. This is why we choose small areas to paint at a time. And it's also important to select the right tool at the right time. Because I'm using a number 6 brush, I'm able to cover more area and I'm able to get through it faster. I could have easily used the number 2 brush to paint this whole thing in. And sometimes that tends to happen, you know. You just get all caught up in what you're doing, you get really focused, and you end up using one brush, which isn't really a big deal. But you can get it done faster if you switch brushes. Alright, so we're painting in the shoulder. I just added some color number 4. We're going to go in and add some color number 5 to diffuse those edges. And it's a lot easier to blend. Because of these light colors, it's just easier to blend. I now go in with color number 4 and I'm painting in the shape of that line. I normally do a diffused edge, but I'm actually painting in the shape. I normally use very small brush strokes, but I'm actually painting the shape of the line. And as I said before, it makes a different blend. I just want you to get used to doing that. Get used to switching up your blends depending on what you're doing. Now, I prefer a more diffuse line, but I want you to be able to do both. Okay, we use that number 6. We're going to fill in that shape. And it's basically what we're doing. I'm not really painting in a shoulder or eyes. I'm just focusing in on small areas and painting them in, which should be your focus. Just find a small area and paint in that small area. Now, if you're able to focus and hone in and do that, the painting should come out fine. And that's what painting really is all about. It's all about one brush stroke at a time. Just take your time and focus in on each brush stroke. So we just about have this shoulder complete. We're now going to paint around the eyelid. So as usual, I add some of that darker color first. I go back in with some lighter color number 4, and we begin to diffuse the edges. Using very small brush strokes. So I'm adding a little bit more color number 3 at this point. I go back in with color number 4 and diffuse the edges a little bit more. It's time to paint in the ears. It's very easy to miss painting ears or eyebrows or just any little area because we become too focused on, say, the eyes or the lips. It's going to take some discipline to focus on every area with the same amount of intensity as you do focus on whatever areas you like the most. I used to do that all the time. I would focus on the eyes and not focus in on anything else. In the end, the paintings and my drawings would look incomplete. Everything on that canvas is as important as everything else. Technically speaking. So I'm diffusing the edges. And that's about it for this layer. Next up, layer 3.